I was a single mom, working 2 jobs, just trying to keep my head above water. On a freezing night, I used my last few dollars to buy a cup of hot soup for a shivering, homeless man at the train station. Hours later, I woke up to the smell of smoke and a frantic, desperate banging on my front door. It was him, and my house was on fire. This is a story about how a single, small act of kindness can come back to you when you need it the most. Before we get into it, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that train station. The 10:42 p.m. train is a lonely place. It's a rolling metal tube filled with the ghosts of a city that has already gone to sleep. The passengers are the other night shift workers, the tired, the weary, the people who live on the far edges of the 9 to 5 world. And me. For the past year, since my husband had passed, this train had become my second home, the rattling, swaying carriage that ferried me from my waitressing job in the city back to my small, quiet, and deeply mortgaged life in the suburbs. Tonight, the cold was a physical, biting thing. A bitter, early winter wind rattled the windows of the train, and I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the familiar, blurry lights of the neighborhood slide by. I was bone tired, the kind of tired that settles deep in your soul, the kind of tired that comes from working 16-hour days, from juggling 2 jobs, a 7-year-old son, and a mountain of bills that seemed to grow higher every single month. I got off at my station, a small, windswept platform that was mostly deserted at this time of night. I pulled my thin coat tighter around me and began the half-mile walk home. It was on the steps leading down from the platform to the street that I saw him. He was huddled on a concrete bench, trying to find some small measure of shelter from the relentless, knife-like wind. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, and he was shivering, a deep, uncontrollable, and body-racking shiver that was painful to watch. He wasn't a drunk. He wasn't a panhandler. He was just a man. A man who had clearly fallen on the hardest of times. He was dressed in clothes that once had been good, a clean but threadbare wool coat, but they were no match for the brutal, freezing cold of this night. I saw the other few passengers who had gotten off the train with me give him a wide berth, their eyes averted, as if his misfortune, his poverty, were a contagious disease. And my first, selfish and deeply tired instinct was to do the same, to just keep walking, to get home to my own warm bed, to my own son. But I couldn't. I looked at his face, at the quiet, desperate dignity in his tired gray eyes, and I thought of my own father, who had worked himself to an early grave in a factory, his body broken by a lifetime of hard labor. I stopped. I turned back. There was a small, all-night coffee cart at the other end of the station, a beacon of steam and light. I walked over. "1 large chicken soup, please," I said to the vendor, "and a piece of bread." The total came to $7.50. I looked in my own wallet. I had a $10 bill and a few coins. It was my lunch money for the next 2 days. I handed the $10 bill to the vendor without a second thought. I walked back to the old man on the bench. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a weary, guarded suspicion. I held out the steaming hot cup of soup and the small paper-wrapped piece of bread. "I thought you might be cold," I said simply. He just stared at the soup, then at my face, and then back at the soup. He did not say thank you, not at first. He just took the cup with his trembling, blue-white hands and held it, letting the warmth seep into his frozen fingers. He took a slow, careful sip, and a shudder of pure, profound relief went through his entire body. He looked up at me again, and his eyes, which had been so full of a distant, gray despair, were now shining with a new and deeply moving light. "God bless you, miss," he whispered, his voice a hoarse, unused thing. "Just stay warm," I said, with a small smile. I turned and began my walk home, the loss of the $10 a small, insignificant price for the strange, unexpected warmth that was now blooming in my own chest. As I walked, I thought about the old, rambling rental house I was trying so hard to keep. I thought about the faulty, flickering porch light that I had been meaning to ask the landlord to fix. I thought about the strange buzzing sound the refrigerator had started making. The worries of my own life, always present, always waiting. I watched the old man in the rearview mirror of my memory, a lonely figure on a cold, dark platform, sipping a cup of hot soup. I felt good. I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I had made a small but real difference in the world. I had no idea that the small, simple, and $7 act of kindness I had just performed was not the end of a story. It was the beginning, and it was about to come back to me in the most terrifying and most miraculous way imaginable. I walked home through the cold, deserted streets, the warmth from the cup of soup I had given away, now a small, defiant ember in my own chest. My house, when I reached it, was a familiar silhouette against the dark, cloudy sky. It was old and a little run down, and the rent was a constant, crushing weight on my shoulders. But it was ours. It was the one small patch of the world that belonged to me and my son, Toby. I peeked into his room. He was fast asleep, his small face peaceful in the soft glow of his dinosaur-shaped nightlight. His breathing a constant, steady rhythm that was the constant, reassuring soundtrack of my life. For him, I thought, I would endure 1,000 more 10-hour shifts, 1,000 more lonely train rides home. As I was locking the front door for the night, the overhead light in the hallway flickered, a frantic, stuttering spasm of electricity before returning to its usual dim glow. I made a weary mental note: call the landlord, again, about the wiring. It was just one more item on an endless list of worries, a small, quiet note of discord in the fragile peace of our little world. I fell into an exhausted, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep that is not a rest, but a temporary surrender. I did not know that deep within the old, frayed, and forgotten walls of my kitchen, a single, ancient wire was beginning to fray. I did not know that a small, insignificant spark was about to be born in the darkness. And I did not know that our smoke alarm, the one I had asked the landlord to replace months ago, had chosen this exact night for its batteries to finally and silently die. The fire started without a sound. It was a small, creeping thing at first, a slow, quiet consumption of old wood and dry plaster. The smoke, a thick, acrid, and almost invisible serpent, began to slither out from the kitchen, silently filling the downstairs rooms, its tendrils beginning to snake their way up the staircase towards the rooms where my son and I slept, completely and totally unaware of the mortal danger that was rising to meet us. I was dreaming, a strange, chaotic dream of a ringing bell that would not stop. But the sound, I slowly realized, as I began to surface from the deep, heavy depths of my exhaustion, was not a bell. It was a banging, a loud, frantic, and thunderous banging on my front door, a sound so violent it seemed to shake the very foundations of the old house. My first thought was one of groggy, irritated confusion. Who on earth was at my door in the middle of the night? I swung my legs out of bed, and my feet touched a floor that was strangely warm. And then I smelled it. Smoke. A thick, choking, and terrifyingly real smell. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I threw open my bedroom door and was met not by a hallway, but by a wall of thick, gray, and acrid smoke. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. "Toby!" I screamed, my voice a raw, ragged thing. I dropped to the floor, crawling on my hands and knees, the long-ago lessons from a grade school fire safety assembly suddenly a clear, bright mantra in my chaotic mind. I found my son's room, and I found him, a small, coughing and terrified bundle in his bed. I scooped him up, shielding his face with my body, and I began the long, blind, and terrifying crawl back towards the stairs, towards the sound of that relentless, life-saving banging. "Fire!" A voice was roaring from the other side of the door, a familiar, raspy voice that I couldn't place. "Get out! Lady, wake up! Get out of the house!" I finally reached the front door, my lungs on fire, my eyes streaming. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my clumsy, shaking fingers finally finding the lock. I threw the door open, and we tumbled out, a mother and a son, into the cold, wet, and beautifully, wonderfully breathable night air. I lay on the damp, cold lawn, my son held tightly in my arms, and I watched as the first angry orange flames began to lick their way out of my kitchen window. And then I looked up. Standing on the sidewalk, his face covered in soot, his eyes wide with a fierce, protective concern, was the old man from the train station, Silas. He was not a ghost. He was not a dream. He was real. And he had just, without a single doubt, saved our lives. "How?" I choked out, my voice a raw, ragged thing. "How did you know?" He just looked at me, then across the street, at the dark, sheltered, and deeply recessed alcove of the closed-down, long-forgotten storefront. It was a place that was invisible to the rest of the world, but a place that a man with nowhere else to go might find a small, dry measure of shelter. He said, "I told you. I never forget a kindness." I stared at him, then at the building across the street, and I finally completely understood. He hadn't been a passing stranger, a man just waiting for a bus. He had been my neighbor, my silent, invisible, and, until this single, terrifying, and miraculous night, completely unknown guardian angel. I knelt on the cold, wet grass, my arms wrapped around my son Toby, and I watched as the first angry orange flames began to lick their way out of my kitchen window. The initial terrifying shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a strange, hollowed-out calm. We were alive. We were safe. And it was all because of the quiet, soot-covered old man who stood a few feet away, watching the fire with a sad, weary resignation in his eyes. Silas, my guardian angel. The wail of sirens, a sound that had once been a source of anxiety, was now the most beautiful music in the world. Fire trucks and police cars descended upon our quiet, sleepy street, a chaotic but welcome invasion of flashing lights and professional calm. The firefighters, a team of strong, focused heroes, immediately went to work, their powerful hoses unleashing a torrent of water against the blaze. As they battled the fire, a police officer, a young man with a kind but serious face, approached me. "Ma'am," he began, "I'm Officer Miller. Are you and your son all right? Do you need medical attention?" "We're okay," I said, my voice a raw, hoarse whisper from the smoke. "We got out. Because of him." I pointed to Silas, who was standing quietly by the curb. The officer's gaze shifted to Silas, and I saw it. The subtle but unmistakable change in his expression. He looked at Silas's worn, threadbare clothes, at his unkempt gray beard, at his soot-stained face, and the kindness in his eyes was replaced by a cool, professional suspicion. He saw not a hero, but a vagrant, a potential suspect. He walked over to Silas. "Sir," he said, his voice now a firm, authoritative instrument, "I'm going to need you to stay right here. I need to ask you a few questions. What is your name? Where do you live?" And in that moment, something inside me, a fierce, protective instinct I didn't know I possessed, ignited. This man, this quiet, dignified, and profoundly good man, had just run into the face of a burning building to save my son and me, and he was being treated like a criminal.
I would not have it. I stood up, my own small frame trembling with a new and unfamiliar fury. I walked over and stood directly between the police officer and Silas. "Excuse me, officer," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "This man is not a suspect. This man is a hero. His name is Silas, and if it were not for him, my son and I would be dead right now inside that house." I looked at Silas and then back at the officer. "He is with me. He is my guest." The officer looked at me, then at Silas, his own mind clearly struggling to process the situation, but the authority in my voice, the absolute unshakable conviction, was enough. He just gave a small, respectful nod. "Okay, ma'am. Understood." The fire was eventually put out, but the house was a ruin. The kitchen was gone. The rest of the house was a wreck of smoke and water damage. It was uninhabitable. A kind older woman from the Red Cross arrived, wrapping me and Toby in thick, warm blankets and telling us they had arranged for a room for us at a nearby motel for a few nights. As we were about to be led to the volunteers' car, I turned to Silas, who had been standing silently on the periphery of the chaos, as if he were preparing to simply melt back into the shadows of the night. "Where will you go?" I asked him. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I'll be all right," he said. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You're not going anywhere." I thought quickly, my mind latching on to a practical, undeniable reason to keep him with me. "You are a material witness to this fire. You are the one who saw it start. I'm going to have to give a full statement to my insurance company in the morning, and I'll need you there to tell them what you saw." I then looked at the Red Cross volunteer. "He needs to come with us. He is the most important witness we have." The volunteer, seeing the logic in my statement, readily agreed.
I sat in the back of that volunteer's car, my sleepy, traumatized son Toby on one side of me, and Silas, the quiet, homeless hero who had saved our lives, on the other. We were a strange, broken, and soot-stained little group, a makeshift family born of a fire. The flames had taken everything we owned: our clothes, our furniture, our photographs, our memories. But as we drove away from the smoldering ruins of our old life, I knew my job wasn't just to rebuild my own life. My new and far more important mission was to find out the story of the man who had just saved it, and to make sure, with every fiber of my being, that he never had to sleep in the cold alone ever again. The motel room the Red Cross gave us was a small, beige, and completely impersonal box. It smelled of disinfectant and a faint, sad scent of 1,000 other transient lives. But it was warm, it was dry, and it was safe. For the first night in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't worried about the flickering lights or the faulty wiring. My son, Toby, exhausted from the terror and the smoke, fell asleep almost instantly in one of the 2 double beds. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the lobby and found Silas, my quiet, soot-stained savior, sat in a worn-out armchair by the window. I sat in the other armchair beside him. We didn't speak for a long time. There were no words big enough to fill the space between what had happened and where we were now. He was a stranger who had saved my life. I was a stranger who had, just a day before, bought him a cup of soup. "I don't know how to thank you, Silas," I finally whispered into the quiet of the room. "You saved my son. You saved me. Everything I had was in that house, but you saved everything that mattered." He just looked at me. His face was a roadmap of a long and difficult life. "You showed me a kindness when I was just an invisible old man, miss," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I just returned the favor." "But why were you even there?" I asked, the question I had been dying to know. "Across the street from my house, of all places?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dark, rain-streaked window.
And then he told me his story. It was not a story of a man who had always been homeless. It was a story of a man who had lost his home not to a fire, but to his own broken heart. He told me he had been a carpenter, a good one. He had had a wife, a daughter, a life. But his wife, the love of his life, had been taken by a sudden, aggressive cancer 5 years ago, and her death had broken him. He had fallen into a deep, dark well of grief, and he had tried to drown that grief in a bottle. In his pain, in his drunken, selfish sorrow, he had pushed away the one person he had left, his daughter. We had a terrible fight, he whispered, his eyes full of a 5-year-old shame. She was just trying to help me, and I said some things, unforgivable things. I told her she was a disappointment. I told her she was better off without me. He shook his head, a single hot tear tracing a path through the soot on his cheek. And she finally believed me. She left, and I haven't seen or spoken to her since. Consumed by his own guilt and shame, he had walked away from his own life. He had sold his tools, abandoned his home, and had been living on the streets ever since. Not because he had to, but because he believed with every fiber of his being that it was what he deserved. The sheltered alcove across the street from my house had been his home for the last 6 months.
I listened to his story, and my own heart ached with a profound and deeply felt empathy. He was not a homeless man. He was a father, a grieving husband, a good man who had been shattered by loss and had been punishing himself for it ever since. I thought about my own small but profound act of kindness at the train station. I had given him a cup of soup because I saw a man who was cold, but he, in his own quiet, heroic way, had given me so much more. He had given me back my son. He had given me back my life. And in that moment, I knew I had a debt to repay. A debt that was about more than just gratitude. It was about justice. It was about healing. "Silas," I said, my voice quiet but firm with a new and absolute sense of purpose. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone. You saved my family. Now," I said, a slow, determined smile on my face, "it's my turn to help you find yours." I looked at the piece of paper in my hand, the one the fire marshal had given me, with the contact information for my insurance agent. The fire had taken everything I owned, but it was also about to give me the resources, the small but powerful financial freedom to do something truly important. My old life of just surviving, of just scraping by, was over, burned to the ground. My new life, my new and far more important mission, was to find the lost daughter of the man who had just saved mine, and to make sure, with every fiber of my being, that he never had to sleep in the cold, alone, ever again. The days that followed the fire were a strange, surreal limbo. My son Toby and I lived out of a single beige motel room, our entire existence reduced to a few changes of donated clothes and the quiet, gnawing uncertainty of our future. Silas stayed with us, a quiet, stoic, and deeply grateful presence. The three of us, this strange, shipwrecked crew, became a family, our bond forged in the shared trauma of the fire. But while my days were filled with the tedious, stressful work of dealing with insurance adjusters and searching for a new place to live, my nights were consumed by a new and far more important mission. My promise to Silas, the promise to help him find his lost daughter, was a fire in my own soul. I started with the little information he had. Her name was Catherine. She would be 32 now. The last place he had seen her was their small hometown in upstate New York 5 years ago. He gave me the last letter she had ever sent him, a sad,
angry and heartbroken piece of paper that he had kept, folded and refolded, in his wallet for all those years. Armed with this, I became a detective. My laptop, which had been salvaged from the fire, was my only tool. I spent every spare moment, late into the night after Toby was asleep, searching. I scoured social media, public records, old online phone directories. The trail was cold, a ghost of a life that had long since moved on. The insurance money, when it finally came, was not a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for a fresh start, and I made a decision. I did not just look for a new apartment for me and Toby. I looked for a small 2-bedroom house, a place with a small backyard, a place with a spare room, a place with enough space for a quiet old man to finally have a home of his own. And I used a small but significant portion of that money to do something I knew I had to do. I hired a private investigator, a man who specialized in finding lost family members. I gave him everything I had: the daughter's name, her last known address, her mother's maiden name.
A month later, we were in our new house. It was small, but it was ours. And Silas, my quiet, gentle roommate, was helping me paint the walls, a slow, happy smile on his face, the haunted look in his eyes finally beginning to fade. It was then that the call came. The investigator had found her. She was living 3 states away, in a small college town. She was a landscape architect. She was married. And, the investigator told me, she had a son of her own. Silas had a grandson he had never met. The journey to that small, quiet town was the most nerve-wracking of my life. Silas sat in the passenger seat, his hands clasped so tightly they were white. He was a man on his way to his own personal judgment day. He was terrified. He was certain she would slam the door in his face, that he had waited too long, that the cruel words he had spoken in his grief 5 years ago were a wound that could never be healed. We found her house. It was a lovely, simple home with a beautiful, wild-looking garden in the front. And there she was, a woman with her father's kind, intelligent eyes, playing on the lawn with a small, red-haired boy. I was just the driver this time. I parked across the street. "You have to do this, Silas," I whispered. "You have to try." I watched as he got out of the car, an old man walking on legs that seemed to tremble with the weight of 5 years of regret. He crossed the street. He stood on the edge of her lawn. The woman, his daughter, Catherine, looked up and saw him. Her face, which had been so full of a happy maternal joy, froze. He did not rush her. He just stood there, his hat in his hands, a silent, humble, and heartbroken old man. And then he just said her name. "Katie," he whispered, a name so full of a lifetime of love that I could feel it from across the street. I watched as she stared at him, a storm of emotions on her face. And then I saw her own face crumple, and she began to cry. Not tears of anger, but tears of a profound and long overdue relief. She ran to him, and they met in the middle of that green lawn. A father and a daughter, finally, after so long, finding their way back home. My vindication was not a moment of revenge. It was this beautiful, sacred, and deeply private moment of healing, a moment I had been privileged enough to help create. I started the car and began to drive away, leaving them to their reunion. My own eyes now blurry with tears. I had started this journey as a lonely, struggling single mother. I was still a single mother. I was still struggling. But I was not lonely anymore. My act of kindness to a stranger had not just saved my life from a fire. It had ignited a fire of its own, a fire of hope, of forgiveness, of the profound and beautiful and life-altering power of a second chance. And that was a warmth that I knew, with a certainty that was as real and as true as the ground beneath my feet, would keep all of us warm for the rest of our lives. An absolutely beautiful and moving story about how one small act of kindness created a ripple effect that healed two families. What do you think of Lydia's final act of paying it forward by helping Silas find his daughter? Let us know in the comments below. If you were touched by this incredible story of compassion and second chances, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and heartwarming stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.